Hey everyone, Dr. Tim Reynolds again. I hope last week we did my first Facebook Live. I hope some of you got to see that. We had an amazing response. I think when I saw it last, close to 2,000 people looked at it, so that's pretty exciting. This time I want to get more into what we do for our businesses. And last time I talked about what I personally do, and so this time I kind of talk about, you have to have both, right? I mean, you are your business, so you have to have the personal way you do things, and then you have to have the business strategy that goes along with that. I'm going to spend some time on what we do. It doesn't make it the right way, it doesn't make it the only way, but I want to give you some ideas, some thoughts of how you might do it. I'm going to look at my clock here because I don't want to go over time. I'm not going to spend more than 30 minutes, that's my commitment. I'm going to try and do less. I have a piece of paper here that I'm going to have to look at occasionally because I want to make sure I get you everything, and every once in a while I might have to put on my reading glasses like that, but don't make fun of me, okay? So last week I talked to you in excruciating detail, some of you would say, about the process that I go through in my year end, about my hibernation, what I think about, and what I do. This week I want to do what we do to prepare for the new year in our businesses. So that's what we're going to spend some time on. So the end of the year for us is, we go annual year to annual year. So about September, I start thinking about what have we accomplished this year, and what worked, what did we succeed at, what did we fail at, what were we not as good as we should have been, and how can we do better next year. And the way I start the process is I basically send a list of questions to my leaders, or I have a leadership meeting, I hand out a list of questions. And in those questions, I tell them that I want them to think about, not only think about the questions, but to take those questions back to their team. So these are heads of departments or heads of clinics or whatever it is that they lead. And so I want them to take that back to their team and to think about these questions as a group. And I give them a month. And so basically they take those questions and they go talk to their team and they answer those questions, and they have about a month to do that, and then they bring it back. It's important, and you may not have, if you just have one clinic, obviously you're not going to be sending stuff out to bunches of leaders, but we started this process when we just had one clinic, and we still do this process in our other business where it's still very small. So you don't have to have a bunch of people. You can take that small group of people. We had 9 people total in our company when we started this process, and you can just give it to those 9 and say, hey, think about these questions and let's come up with some answers to these questions. In fact, I'd highly recommend it because it's easier to start small like that, so as you grow, you can do the same thing with bigger and bigger groups of people rather than say, oh, we'll wait till we're big till we do it. So I actually outline some of the questions that I send and ask, and I'm going to put this in a blog too, so you'll have this in writing, but it's the questions I ask. These are 10 questions. What is our competition doing well? Now, we tend to say, well, our competition doesn't do anything well, we're better than them, etc. But if that were true, the parking lot would be empty and their doors would be closed. And if they're still in business, then they're doing something well. Number 2, what business are we in that we should not be in? What are we doing that maybe we should think about stopping doing? And the alternative to that, what business are we not in that we should think about being in? What should we think about doing that we're not currently doing? At our core, what are our values? Now, we've had our company values for a long, long time, and some of you have as well. If you've come to the summit, then you definitely have those. In fact, speaking of the summit, there's going to be a link on here. Please take a look at this winter summit. It comes up January the 26th. I'm going to go into this in really, really good detail at the summit, not just this, lots of other things. I really need you and your team to be at the summit, so please click on the link and get to the summit. It's in Las Vegas. We're going to have a great time, and what happens at the summit stays at the summit. All right, so next question. So even though we've had our values for a long time, sticking to that, even though we've had our values for a long time, it's always good to reevaluate them and go more in depth and think about who we are and what we're becoming. Next question is, what's working, what's not working? What's working? What's working in the company? What's not working in the company? Next, what needs to be changed in our company and what should never be changed? There are some things that need to be changed, and there are some things that we would never change, and I think those things are worth talking about. Question number 7 is, all things being equal, why do we choose to work here? Everybody in your company is a volunteer. They're volunteering to work for you versus volunteering to work for either your competition or some other industry. All things being equal, why are the people who work at your company choosing to work there? Number 8, how can we better serve our communities? We love serving our communities. That's what we're about. That's what we're about. We're a company that makes profits in order to fulfill our purpose, not the other way around. We have a purpose and we have to make profits in order to fulfill our purpose. If you don't make profits, you can't fulfill your purpose, but we don't get those two things confused. So how do we serve our communities? Number 9, how can we better develop leaders? One of our values is leaving a legacy of leaders, and we always have to think about what are we doing well to develop leaders and what are we not doing so well, and why is it so difficult? Angela's back there behind the camera laughing because we just had this conversation. And it's a challenge, right? I mean, that's one of the hard things. And number 10, what is our number 1 challenge right now? It's interesting to ask your team, what is our number 1 challenge? And to see the different answers they come up with. What's really crazy is how they all come up with the same answer. And you didn't even know that was your number 1 challenge. In fact, the first time we ever had a leadership meeting, we were a growing, active company. And I said to the leaders, I said, what is our number 1 challenge? And unanimously, without ever talking to each other, they all said, communication. And while I knew communication was an issue as we're growing, I didn't realize how much they recognized it to be the issue. And so we said, good, and let's go to work on that. What can we do to improve communication internally with each other and how we talk to each other, et cetera, et cetera. And you know what? It's still a problem, but it's a lot less of a problem now because we've started to work on it. So that's kind of the what happens. A month later, they'll go out with their team, and they'll come back a month later, and they'll have answers to these questions. And the great thing about having answers to those questions is now we have a forum or a platform that we can start to think about how to set goals for the next year. Because if we know the problems, if we thought about the competition, we've thought about strategy, we've thought about what we should change and shouldn't change, what business we should be in, what business we shouldn't be in, now we can start to think about how to set goals for the next year. And so that's what we do. I sit down with them and I say, all right, now I want you to take the answers to these questions and we talk about them. And now I want you to go back to your team and say, based on the answers to these questions, start to lay out for me what your goals for the next year are going to look like for your department or your clinic. What are those goals going to look like? And I challenge each of them to do that. So we have goals for each individual unit, each individual company, and each individual department in each company. So accounting will have their own set of goals, or IT, or marketing, and then each clinic will have its own set of goals, or billing will have its own set of goals. And so that's how we sort of put those together. My role in this is to make sure they keep these at a high level. What tends to happen, if you've never done this before, is everybody starts doing one of two things that your job to prevent. One is they start getting down in the weeds. Well, maybe we could do a radio campaign with these 3 radio stations or send out a newspaper article. That's not a goal. That's getting down in the weeds of how we're going to accomplish the goal. The goal is how do we get new patients or how do we find a new client? So to raise it back up and say, hey, at a board level, what are we really talking about here? We can talk about strategies a little bit later. So that's one of my roles. My second role is to make sure that people don't become defensive for their territory. What can tend to happen is people will start to become territorial about their territory and become defensive about their territory, their department, or their clinic. And they don't mean it in a harmful way, but you can start to fill some territory and you say, whoa. We're all on the same team together. Let's raise this up to another level and start talking about, as a team, as a company, how do we do this all together? So those are sort of my 2 roles as I go through this process. Now, we just finished this process in our company, or we're in the process of finishing it, so that when I go back to last week, I talked about hibernation. When I go into hibernation for this year, I will have a pretty good list. I'm going to have a pretty good idea of what each company, each clinic, and each department within them is thinking, their leaders are thinking, and what they think they ought to do. And that's great. Realize that some people are very mature in their leadership. Some people are just beginning in their leadership. So the quality of the questions and the quality of the goals will be varied depending on their leadership, but that's about developing their leadership. That's part of the fun of this, is helping them to do better and to go better. So the next thing we do is we start to create goals for the company. And one of the ways we do this is we review our goals together from last year. Here's what we said we were going to do last year. what did we accomplish, what didn't we accomplish, and how do we set those for next year? Should we move this one on into the next year because we didn't get it done, or should we just eliminate that because it just turned out that wasn't a good thing to plan? Or we accomplished this, but we could have done better. We knocked this one out of the park. We don't need to focus on that this time. We need to focus on something else. And that's sort of the discussion we start having. Then one of the best ways to set goals is just like I do in my personal life, is to sit with a calendar for the next year and as a group say, all right, let's put some things in place that are already on the calendar. Right? We're opening a clinic in April. Good. Let's put that on the clinic. That's got to go on the calendar. All right. We know we have this Wowzapalooza is one of our events. We know that's happening in May. We know that in August we're going to have a leadership course. We know that, so we start laying out things that are already planned and or on the calendar so that we can start to plan around the things that are already there, just like I do for personal. Start thinking about the types of goals we might set, start brainstorming session about what those might look like. Understand that this is about culling ideas, right? C-U-L-L, culling ideas of how do, of the 400 things people have come up with, how do we narrow these down to a focus that we as a group can all say, these are the most important things. Now what's interesting is, so in one of our businesses we have 15 clinics in 4 states. So each one will have its own individual ideas of what's the most important thing in that market with that group of people at this time. And that may look very different from another one in this other market with this other group of people at that time. This one may be, 8 years old. This one may be 6 months old. This leader may have just arrived. This leader may be an experienced leader. So they're not going to look the same. And then wrapping that with the envelope of the entire company, how does that fit in with the goals of the company as a whole? So it's challenging. I mean, it's fun. It's not easy. It's hard. But, Henry Ford said, thinking is the hardest thing we can do. That's why very few people do it, right? Most people rather just get up and go to work and just go through the robotic task of doing their job so they don't have to think. This is a real hard thinking process, but it's good. What needs to be eliminated? What needs to be expanded? My job there is to make sure I process the workflow once again so everybody's kind of thinking at that level. All right. Now, once we're done, what I try and do is categorize by department or clinic what those goals are, and then try and take those and turn those into the top 10. All right, of all these things, that needs to be done, this needs to be done, not saying they don't, but if we could only accomplish 10 things, if December of next year, we were sitting here in December of next year, which 10 things do we wish we would have accomplished? That's very difficult to do, but if you can do it, you start to focus everybody's attention. Here's the even better thing. Of those 10, which 4 would be the most important? If we could only do 4 things this year, which 4 things would be the most important? And then even take it a step further and say, of those 4, if our company could only do one thing this next year, for the next 12 months, if we could only do one thing, what is the most important thing that we could do? If you can get that kind of clarity and that kind of focus, you're going to have a team that's going to be outstanding. All right, so once we do that, we start to create action plans for the goals. So I'll help them to say, all right, so your goal is to increase your revenue by 25%, let's say. Tell me what that looks like. What's your action plan? Does that mean more customers? Does that mean each customer, there's only 3 ways to grow a business. You can increase your number of customers, you can increase the amount of dollars per ticket for each customer, or you can increase the number of times a customer comes back. So if your goal is to increase revenue by 25%, I'm not saying that's a good goal or a bad goal, I'm just throwing that out of the air, then what is your plan? How are you going to do that? By what month? By what month is it going to be at 10% or 15%? And start to lie it out and strategize exactly what that's going to look like. Okay, we're doing good on time. One of the ways to do this is to say, what are the obstacles in the way? And the way I like to do this with a leader is to say this. If your goal were to have 25% more revenue than you do now, why aren't you already there? What's stopping you from being there right today? The answer to that question often provides the strategy to get there. If they say, well, the problem is nobody knows about us. Good, we just create a strategy. Strategy is, what could we do to get people to know about us? If the answer is, well, we just don't have a leadership team in place that can take us from here to there, the strategy becomes creating the leadership team to take us. If the answer is, well, we just don't have the budget, good, then the strategy becomes, how do we create the budget that's going to do it? So the obstacle truly is the way. How do we get from point A to point B? Is we ask the question, why are we not already at point B? And the answer is A, B, C. The strategy becomes solve A, solve B, and solve C, and by definition, it takes us there. So the obstacle truly does become the way. Here's the interesting thing we've learned over the years. Once you figure out the obstacle and how to solve it, a whole myriad of other doors also open, which creates more obstacles and more problems and more things, right? That's growth. That's what this is all about. So it's a never-ending process, and that's why I love it. It's 3D chess. What you don't realize is when you move this pawn on this level, it affects this level down here, and you didn't know that. And so that's business, right? I mean, that's what it's really all about, which I find fascinating and fun. And then finally, once we have the action steps, we need to think about, and this is where budgeting, and we don't call it budget because we hate the word budget, we call it spending plan. This is where your spending plan comes in. Where do we allocate, and how much allocation of resources do we do for that project? So I'm going to use Angela as an example since she's the one on the camera. Hi, Angela.
Hello.
I'm going to use her as an example right now because we were talking about doing a marketing piece in one of the areas where we're at. And one of the things that she said is, well, I don't think our CFO is going to approve that. Now, here's the point. You have a limited amount of resources, whether that's people, money, time, talent. The question is, what is the best use of those resources? So in this case, if we're talking about money, let's just assume we have a budget of $100. And we have a marketing budget of that entire budget of the company. I'm using 100 for round. Hopefully your company has more than a budget of $100, but I'm just using round numbers. It's $100. And of that, your marketing budget is $10. So when you say we want to do a marketing campaign, you're asking two questions when it comes to money. Number one, of the $10 we've been allocated, is that the best use of the $10? The second question you've inherently asked is, of the $100, is $10 the right number to allocate to marketing? Or should we allocate 20 because we have this idea which will double our business? Or should we allocate all 10 of the dollars at this thing because this is the thing that's going to knock it out of the park? So that's really the question you're asking all the time. The asking all the time is you say, you know what, I have this many people working 40 hours a week. What is the best use of their time? And so you're always asking that question. You're not asking if this marketing idea is a good idea. Of course it's a good idea. The question is it the best idea for the time, people, resources, and money we have in place? If it is, then let's allocate some more resources to it. If it's not, then you take it away and you say, you know, I think we could use the money, the people, the time, the effort, the talent somewhere else. And that's always the discussion. That's always the discussion. So there isn't really a thing. So you think about it, why do we get point A to point B? Well, because nobody knows about us. Why doesn't anybody know about us? Well, because we only have $10 in the marketing budget. Oh, well, should we allocate more resources to the marketing budget, or are we not spending the $10 property in the marketing budget? Well, I think that we just need to double the marketing budget. Okay, tell me why. Well, I think if we do, we can do A, B, and C. Wow, that's a really good deal. Let's double the marketing budget. It's all about that discussion. And that's only in marketing. We could be talking about any department or any clinic, and it's that same discussion, but it's that discussion that provides the richness, that provides the interaction, that digs deep with everybody on your team, where one person says, and here's the only criteria. Everybody, when I shut the door, I always say, look, we have no chain of command when the door's shut. This is a brainstorming session. We're all equals. But here's my one criteria. What you're saying has to be in the best interest of the company. Not in your best interest, not in territorial, not in defending yourself, or not in trying to prove you're right. My favorite saying is, don't get married to it. Don't get married to your idea. It might be a great idea, and it might not. You should be able to tell me why that's the best idea we've ever had, and simultaneously be able to argue why that's the stupidest thing we've ever done. You know, if a good attorney, a good prosecuting attorney can argue the defense's case better than the defense. And a good defense attorney can argue the prosecution's case better than a good prosecutor. Because the intelligence comes from being able to argue both sides of the equation. That's the intelligence. So I may have gotten off on a tangent there, I apologize, but I think it's really, really important as you set your goals to be able to look at what, you only have 365 days. What's the best use of that 365 days coming up? All right, now I have a pretty good idea of the direction. So now when I go into hibernation, I'm going to spend a little time thinking about and putting together these goals for the company. I'm going to jot down some questions as I read their answers. I'm going to jot down some ideas, those kinds of things. That's my thing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with what I call the BHAG. Now, I stole that from somewhere, I don't know where, but it stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. And a big, hairy, audacious goal basically means what is the mission of our entire company for this year in a sentence that everybody can understand and get. And here's what makes it difficult. So in my mind as the business owner, if I say we're going to increase revenue by 20% with a 20% margin, I understand all of the other stuff that has to happen in order to make that happen is really, if everything pulls together, that will be the end result. And that's a horrible BHAG. Because when you go back to your team and you say, we're going to increase revenue by 20% with 20% bottom line, that sounds ridiculous to most people who are working. So how do you word that in a different way that makes sense to the person doing their job, where they get on board and say, you know what, I'm 100% a job. Because my whole nature of thinking is the most important thing I can do for my team is to make sure that they have a safe, secure, profitable company to work for the next 10, 20 years. That's really my job. And so if I explain it that way, that's very different than saying increase our revenue, da-da-da-da-da. Because now that applies to them so they can pay their mortgage and put their kids through college and be a part of something that's going to be safe and secure. That's what I was really trying to say. But the words we speak are super powerful, right? And so if I say it one way, it sounds like I'm profiteering. And if I say it the other way, it sounds like we're moving as a unit and a company together. The result is the same. That's the interesting thing. All right, so that's what the B had. When the process finishes, my job then is to take it back to our team, and since our problem is communication, to communicate to every team member in a variety of ways what our goals for the year are, what we're going to accomplish, where we're headed. And this isn't easy, right? Everybody in all of our locations has to figure out or find out, number one, where we're headed and what we're doing, and why did they care? Why is that important to them? I just explained a little bit of how to do that. But really, every individual wants to know, yeah, I get the company goals, but why is that important to me? And there are a variety of ways, right? You can reward people with money. You can reward people with just rewards. You can get people on board with philosophy. You can think of it. So there's a variety of methods to do it. But I think if you have to at least be thinking, why would that be important to the girl, single mom, working at the front desk? Why would that company goal relate to her? Well, because if she gets it, then next year, blah, blah, blah. Or as a group, if we do it, then there's going to be this special thing that happens to us. Whatever that looks like, however you can communicate that to them, that's what's important. So that's kind of what we do. And when I'm done, essentially my goals have a notebook, and the notebook's going to say company's values, mission, purpose. Then the next page is going to be our BHAG and our goals for the year and the steps to accomplish them. And it's going to have a series of tabs, and under each tab will be, clinic 1, 2, 3, marketing, IT. And so anytime I meet with the leaders from those, I can open that up and go, okay, in January we talked about these things, how are we doing? Where's it going? Are we headed in the right direction? What does that look like? So that's how we do it. Now, I wish we did it as cleanly as I just made it sound. But the reality is we have 315 team members, we have a variety of leaders in various places. Some people don't turn in their stuff, some people do turn in their stuff, some people turn in time. Just know that's going to happen. That's part of it. It's messy. It's not as clean and tidy and as it should be. That's okay. Your job is to keep working at it until it cleans it up, until you can get it down to a process. Look, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And so we're making a big old hairy omelet here. And in order to make that hairy omelet, we break a lot of eggs, and you know, we love it. We have some fun in the process, and I hope you guys do. Hopefully what I said to you today is helpful. Hopefully you can at least take some nuggets from it. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for taking the time. Keep living every minute. Dr. Tim Reynolds. Take care.